Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 29th session of the World University Summit 2023. The session is titled Low-Income Countries and SDGs, Time to Shift the Goalpost. First, I'll be introducing the speakers and myself, and then I'll be discussing the concept note, and then we'll move on to the discussion session of this session. So our first speaker is Dr. Tony George, who's a professor at Jindal Global Law School, OP Jindal Global University. Our second speaker is Dr. Lina Elisabeth Sonne, professor, Jindal School of Law and Humanities, OP Jindal Global University, India. And we're delighted to have here with us Professor Susi Herti Afriani, who's head of Office of International Affairs, Raden Fatah State Islamic University, Indonesia. And I am Arpita Gupta. I'm a professor of law at Jindal Global Law School and Vice Dean of Research at the university's research office. I'll be discussing the panel theme and then we'll move on to question and answer session for the panelists. Universities have long been entrusted by society with the responsibility to contribute not only to their local communities, but also to the global community through research and teaching. Their faculty and students can contribute to developing a holistic understanding of a wide range of local, national, and global challenges and find ways to address these. The role of universities in the road to sustainable development is crucial. There is perhaps no better way for universities to strengthen their commitment to confront the societal issues our generation is faced with than to adopt the framework of sustainable development goals in their pedagogy and management strategies. Universities can also collaborate with other stakeholders such as government, businesses, industry, and civil society actors in working towards the implementation of sustainable development goals. Although the SDGs explicitly recognize education and research as goals, universities have a much broader role to play in the implementation of all SDGs by contributing to interdisciplinary research, innovation, leadership, teaching, and learning to create global awareness and solutions. The Sustainable Development Goals, also referred to as the Global Goals, were adopted by UN in 2015 as a universal call to transform our world, action to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure that by 2030, all people enjoy peace and prosperity. The 17 SDGs are well integrated. They recognize that action in one area will affect outcomes in others, and that development must balance social, economic, and environmental sustainability. Low-income countries are often synonymous with underdeveloped countries, which face struggles relating to a struggling or underdeveloped economy, a low human development index, and reduced quality of life. Other issues related to poor economic health include below average life expectancy, high infant mortality rates, poor educational outcomes, degrading environmental and climate conditions, and inferior healthcare systems. The first target of the Sustainable Development Goals is to eradicate extreme poverty for all people everywhere by 2030. There are national definitions to define poverty. Poverty lines at the national and local level are frequently revised upward, and there are good reasons for this. But this approach risks the possibility that steady development progress will not yield poverty reduction simply because the poverty line keeps moving too. It is important, therefore, before we set the goal, we should fix the goalpost. Now, let's move on to a discussion session amongst the panelists. The first question that I would ask the panel to address is, what role can higher education institutions play in solving these perennial issues of changing poverty lines? Professor George.
Thank you very much, Professor Arpita. Am I audible? Yeah, I'm so sorry that there is some problem with my camera, so I've switched it off. As far as your question is concerned, I think it's very important that we understand the role of higher education as far as in particular universities in the context of low-income countries from two perspectives. I think the first important perspective is to understand the definition or the nature of poverty. How do we define poverty? Because what has happened is that we try to define poverty based on the dominant understandings of poverty in economic terms. And what we need to do is we have to move away from this economic understandings of poverty and try to understand and redefine poverty from the perspective of a rights-based approach. If we move towards a rights-based approach, what happens is that we'll have a more holistic understanding of poverty, and that is more suitable to our modern times. The second important aspect, I think, as far as your question is concerned, is with regard to the nature of poverty from the perspective of climate change. Now, we know that climate change is a reality that is all upon us, and higher educational institutions, particularly universities, we are at the forefront as far as the battle against climate change is concerned. So we have to examine poverty also from the perspective of climate change, in particular, the concept of climate resilience. So that is my second important submission. Now, the third one is the role of universities in skill development. So we all know that the universities not only provide a platform for nurturing new ideas, but more importantly, universities have a central role to perform in furthering skill development. So we all know that higher education is a very expensive prospect, at least for many in low-income countries. And therefore, it is essential that those who indulge in higher education or those who move up to higher education levels, they should have the employable skills. So even in, if you look at many of the Western countries, what we find is that student debt is a major problem. And that actually prevents a lot of young minds from pursuing a higher education. So when we talk about poverty, it is extremely important that we also consider the skill development role of universities. And I think based on these three important factors which I have to offer, we might be able to actually fix the goalposts. So that is what I have as far as your first question is concerned.
Thank you, Professor George. Professor Sonne.
Thank you very much. I'd like to build on what Professor George was just mentioning and think about sort of a little more on the implementation of sort of poverty alleviation or development measures. So I see four particular areas where universities really contribute. I mean, four sort of broad areas. The first is, of course, to create a space to encourage interest in and really sort of the care for development and having to focus on development among students, whether that is development in focus directly on poverty alleviation, or focusing on working with marginalized communities, or focusing on businesses that are social in aspect, but encouraging that interest and exposure to development is really important for universities. Second, I would say research is a major opportunity at universities, undertaking research for the sort of greater good on grand challenges, on meeting SDGs, etc. Universities has faculty at university have a much better, have a unique chance in undertaking this research, given that we're not under the sort of financial constraints that a consulting firm or other firms in the private sector are, for example. The third, I would say, of course, teaching and skills, like Professor George already said, providing the right skill set for the young generation to go out there and really find ways to encourage development and reduce poverty alleviation. The fourth, I would say, and I work on social entrepreneurship, so of course I would say the encouragement of social startups and innovation that focuses on social impact and creating social value in society. It's a huge opportunity, and a lot of universities, including Jindal, does that. So those are probably the 4-5 different areas that I would say are really important that universities should work on.
Thank you, Professor Sonne. Professor Afriani.
Thank you, Professor Arpita. I'm really impressed the answer from Professor Sonne and Professor Tony. Allow me now to share my perspective toward the role of higher education institution can play in solving this perennial issue of changing poverty lines. Higher education institution, for me, of course, can play an important role in solving the perennial problem of poverty line change in many forms, including, I think, the first is by producing a competent workforce. Higher education institution can provide education and training to their students so that they have the necessary skills and knowledge to work in leading sectors that can help reduce poverty, such as the agricultural and fisheries sector, small and medium industry, and the tourism sector. The second is by providing research and innovation. Through research and innovation, higher education institution can help address poverty challenges, such as how to develop more efficient production methods, improve the quality and productivity of agriculture produce, create new jobs, and expand access to the poor to essential services, such as clean water and sanitation. The third is by providing social assistance programs. Higher education institution, for example, can provide social assistance programs such as scholarship and financial support for underprivileged students to help them obtain higher education and increase their employment opportunities. This can help reduce inequality and social and economic inequality in society. Fourth, I think, is by providing skills development. Higher education institution can provide training and skill development for the community around the campus in areas such as entrepreneurship, business management, or digital skills. This can help improve, I think, people's ability to find work and provide support for those who want to start small or medium-sized businesses. And the last, almost the same as Professor Sonne, I have 5 highlight by providing consulting services. Higher education institution can provide consulting services for government and communities to help develop effective policy and program to address poverty. This can help increase community participation and engagement in effort to overcome poverty and improve social welfare. Therefore, in our opinion, higher education institutions must play a proactive role in solving this perennial problem of poverty line change by providing strengthening, support, and solution for the community to reduce the problem of poverty. Thank you, Ms.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Afriani. My next question for the panel is to ask their opinion on suggesting some innovative research areas where research can be conducted to give policy input to policymakers so that notable sustainable development goals can be achieved in a holistic manner. Professor George.
Thank you very much, Professor Arpita. Can you, yeah, you can hear me. Yeah, as far as innovative research areas are concerned, I think one important area where universities must focus is the area of water management. Now, water has become, accessing water has become a major human rights issue. And as we all know, I mean, nearly 4 billion people lack access to clean and safe drinking water. That is a major issue, particularly in developing countries, low-income countries. And I think that is one major area where universities should conduct cutting-edge research, which can help government develop policy. Now, I have one more area to suggest where I feel that universities can do cutting-edge research, and that is the area of coastal zone management. Now, as many of us know, nearly 50% of our population, that is the global population, close to about 4 billion, 3.5 to 4 billion people, they live within 50 kilometers of the coastline. And many of our mega cities are all coastal cities. So what happens is that you have populations, gargantuan populations situated on the coastlines, you have huge developmental challenges. And more importantly, now you have the problem of climate change. You have the problems of sea level rise. So how do we manage this coastal population? How do we ensure that coastal lives are not disrupted and coastal cities continue to thrive well into the future? And as of now, we know that by 2050, many of the coastal cities, including Mumbai, large parts of Mumbai will go under the water. So what do we do about it? So I feel that it's very important that universities, apart from the area of water, they also spend considerable resources in trying to develop cutting-edge research as far as this aspect of coastal management, coastal zone management is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor George. Professor Sonne, your inputs, your thoughts.
Thank you. I wanted to bring in a sort of a broader point. I think there's a lot of areas and a lot of fantastic professors and other faculty doing amazing work already, so I don't want to impose my views. But I think there's an opportunity for universities to think about how to undertake research outside of our silos. And of course, many of us are driven by the academic game of publishing, but can we find ways to meet this academic criteria and at the same time be able to engage with other stakeholders, work more closely with government, work more closely, say, with the private sector, work more closely with the civil society sector, in that way find ways to collaboratively work together, because these are all very complex problems, so you need input from a whole range of actors. And quite often when we sit in academia, we sit in a slightly more siloed space. So that would be my contribution, to see if we can open up and find ways to collaborate a little more over different spheres.
I completely agree with you. Working with the research office, this is one thing that I've realized, that we need to break all the silos between various organizations and stakeholders, but with, between disciplines as well. So,
Yeah.
Professor Sonne. Professor Afriani.
Thank you, Prof. Arpita and Prof. Sonne. In Raden Fatah perspective, there are 7 innovative research area where I think research can be conducted to give policy input to policy makers so that noble sustainable development goals can be achieved in a holistic manner, among others. The first, water management. Research can be conducted to explore innovation in more effective and sustainable water resource management, including water desalination and wastewater treatment technology. The second, renewable energy. Research can be conducted to improve the availability and effectiveness of renewable energy, such as solar, wind, hydro, and others. The third, I think, sustainable food and agriculture. Research can be conducted to improve the availability, quality, and efficiency of food production without harming the environment. Example of research are the fields of agroforestry, organic farming, and sustainable agriculture. And fourth, economic equity. Research for us can be conducted to understand way that inclusiveness and equity can be improved in the economy, including studies on wealth redistribution, gender equality, and employment opportunity for vulnerable groups. And fifth, sustainable transport. Research, I think, can be conducted to develop and implement sustainable transport technology, including electric vehicles and efficient public transport. Seek environmental health, and can be, I think, understand the impact of the environment of human world or health, as well as efforts to prevent and reduce exposure to environmental pollution. And the last, environmental policy itself. Research can be conducted to evaluate existing environmental policy and improve their effectiveness, including waste management, ecosystem protection, and protection of endangered species. Thank you, Ms. Arpita.
Thank you. Excellent, Professor Afriani. The next point of discussion is as follows. Since the 17 SDGs are well integrated, and we recognize that action in one area will affect outcomes in others, can the panelists suggest a model or framework or even some initial thoughts which can assist in ensuring that the sustainable development goals are met by the deadline that we have set, 2020? Professor George, your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Arpita. Yeah, with regard to this question, I think there are several frameworks that are presently being utilized to implement the Sustainable Development Goals. So rather than going into the frameworks, what I feel is more important is that we have to look at what are the necessary elements of these frameworks. Frameworks can vary from country to country, from region to region, depending upon developmental priorities. What is more important than the framework are the essential elements of the framework. So I'll focus on some of the essential elements which I feel are very important. The first one is with regard to financial resources. when we develop a framework to essentially implement sustainable development, we have to ensure that we have adequate financial resources in place. The second one is with regard to capacity. How much capacity do we have? Are we technically competent to actually implement or take up the challenges posed by the implementation of the sustainable development goals? So that is another important element that we need to consider. The third one is, of course, access to technology. What kind of technology do we need to implement the sustainable development goals? And then we need about partnerships, because of course we know that there is a divide between developed countries and developing countries. And within developing countries, there needs to be this idea of partnership, creating more partnership. And even within a national context, we may need partnerships between the government, the private sector, civil society. So partnerships, the idea of partnerships is extremely important as far as a framework that is being created to secure the implementation of the sustainable development goals. Then I think the aspect of accountability, that is also extremely critical, because when you talk about frameworks, one important aspect that we often omit to consider is the aspect of accountability. So there has to be accountability. That's very important. And then also there should be provision for stock taking, and there has to be commitment throughout the entire process. And more importantly, there has to be support from the developed countries as far as the implementation of these frameworks are concerned. So I think rather than the framework, we must focus more on the core elements that can sustain these frameworks. Thank you, Professor Arpita.
Thank you, Professor George. I can't agree more with you. Professor Sonne.
Thank you. I think that was an excellent summary by Professor George, and I actually don't have much to add apart from saying, I mean, it's back to the collaboration and partnerships, of course. The other thing is to, of course, work with the people on work with the people on the ground, meaning if you're creating some sort of solution, don't sit in your own silo and do it. Work with the people who it's for and let them lead to fully understand what it is they need to solve, the sort of problems and challenges they face. And I think there's enough research out there today, there's enough work trying to do this. It's not that easy, it's a fairly complex task to achieve these goals and implement these programs. But I think work with the people on the ground is super important.
Thank you, Professor Sonne. Professor Afriyani.
Thank you, Prof. Arpita. So I have 4 actually the models or frameworks which can assist in ensuring that sustainable development goals are met in 2030. The first we call Sustainable Development Framework. This framework emphasizes the integration of 3 dimensions of sustainable development, namely economic, social, and environmental. Within this framework, we hope that sustainable development goal can be achieved through collaboration and partnership with various sectors and actors, including the government and the private sector and civil society. So I totally agree with Professor Sonne just mentioned, building and enhancing partnership and collaboration. The second, we call Sustainable Development Partnership Framework. This framework, we hope, can recognize the importance of partnership and collaboration in achieving sustainable development goals. This framework maybe promote the involvement of a large number of sectors, such as the private sector, government, civil society, and academia, in the process of planning, decision-making, and policy implementation. And the last we call Sustainable Development Innovation Framework. The framework highlights the development of innovation in building sustainable development. This innovation includes technology, policy, and business models that focus on sustainable development. All of the above frameworks that I have mentioned require important coordination between the public, of course, private sector, and civil society to achieve sustainable development goals by 2030.
Thank you, Professor Afriyani.
You're welcome.
The next question for the panel is something that is integral to real problem solving, and that is, what kind of interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary research areas you suggest that can help in strengthening this area? Professor George.
Yes, thank you, Professor Arpita. Yeah, with regard to the different interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary research areas are concerned, I think like what Professor Sonne and Professor Afriani and what you yourself pointed out, highlighted, we need to break silos, because as of now, disciplines, I mean, there's a tendency to work in silos. And it's very important that we break those silos and we engage in interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary research. So having said that, I feel that there are core areas like what Professor Afriani had pointed out earlier, like forest management, water management, waste management, climate change adaptation, organic farming. These are all areas where there could be interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary research. Now, in addition to these, the usual, the list of subjects that I just now suggested, what I feel is that we have to go beyond interdisciplinarity and multidisciplinarity, and we must focus on this idea of transdisciplinarity, because it is extremely important that universities must up the ante, and they must focus on this idea of transdisciplinarity, where all these disciplinary silos are broken, and the discipline itself loses its relevance, because we are trying to create an entirely new set of knowledge, a new taxonomy, a new vocabulary, as far as that is the main purpose of transdisciplinary research. And I think if sustainable development goals are to be attained by 2030, and universities are to play a significant role, it is extremely important that they must engage in transdisciplinary research. Thank you.
Excellent, Tony, for raising this point. Professor Sonne.
Thank you. I think we need to find, so we need much more interdisciplinary research, of course, but I think we also need better, I don't know, institutional mechanisms or even platforms for engaging in interdisciplinary research and incentivizing people to take part in, or at least reducing the barriers to interdisciplinary research, which means finding ways to meet across schools or boundaries, research boundaries within universities, finding ways to engage with actors at in various spheres outside of university, whether it's public, private, etc. And also incentivizing ways to get the research out there when it is interdisciplinary, because we tend to stick to what we know, and that tends to be within a discipline. So I think we need better incentive structures and better sort of mechanisms to engage with interdisciplinary work. I also think we need to focus on practice-oriented research. And again, academia has a history of focusing on a little less practice-oriented work. It's not, if you look at what gets published, it hasn't, at least until recently, it hasn't really been really practice-oriented work. That's seen more as a sort of consulting work that you do on the side or whatever. And I think that needs to shift as well. We need to think of practice-oriented research as equally important, or maybe even more important than other kinds of research that gets published or gets high visibility. And in terms of areas, I think if you look at today, the sort of focus we have on the role of digitization in society, the role of technology in society, those are examples of areas that could very easily have multidisciplinary, plenary or interdisciplinary research focus. I'm thinking bringing in people from different sectors, whether it's agri, water, education, and working together, or whether it is different schools, looking at different aspects of marginalization, whether it's poverty, gender, community, etc. So there are various ways that you can work on existing, and of course, technology has a long history of poverty-related focus in research, like ICT for development or tech for good. So there are existing movements that work on technology for good, and they also recognize that technology goes beyond the technology to also include social aspects. And so if we add that to also having a multidisciplinary aspect that uses different sectors, uses different kinds of schools, then I think we could have a really rounded, interesting research space going forward.
Thank you, Professor Sonne. Professor Afriani.
Yeah, what an impression of thought from Professor Sonne and Professor Tony. Allow me try to answer and share For us, there are at least 5 interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary areas that can strengthen. The first area is green technology and clean energy. Interdisciplinary research in the field of green technology and clean energy can help in reducing carbon emission, which is one of the focuses of SDGs. This research involves, for example, various disciplines such as mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, material technology, and others. The second area is sustainable agriculture. Multidisciplinary research in sustainable agriculture involves biological, chemical, and technological sciences with the aim of producing low carbon and environmental friendly agricultural products. The goal is to meet the world's food needs while keeping the environment sustainable. The third area is called inclusive education. Interdisciplinary research in the field of inclusive education involves psychology, neuroscience, sociology, and others with the aim of creating an inclusive education system for all children, including children with disabilities, children from marginalized group, and poor children. The fourth area is global health. The multidisciplinary research in this field of global health involves medical sciences, public and social sciences. The goal is, of course, to address global health problems such as obesity, the spread of the virus, and poverty. And the last area is, I think, is smart city. Interdisciplinary research in the field of smart city involves information technology science, applied science, and city management. And the goal is to create a sustainable smart city by improving quality of life and people's well-being. And in the field of SDGs, interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary research can be an effective approach to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. All science and technology must be used optimally to achieve the SDG. Thank you, Prof. Arpita.
Thank you, Professor Afriani. The next point of discussion for the panel is as follows. Why is that, despite of path-breaking research in the field of economics and other allied areas, we still have not been able to find sustainable solution to these issues, which makes it difficult to achieve sustainable development goals in time and in a holistic manner? Professor George.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Arpita. I think this is a very difficult question because it's all about implementation. And when we try to find out what are the factors which actually impede the attainment of sustainable development goals, I think the major problem stems from the fact that we, in spite of several years having elapsed since the Bertin Commission came up with its idea of sustainable development being a balance between environment and development, the essential problem is that we still do not know. We get to figure out what exactly is sustainable development in a given context. The definition stands at a high level of abstraction. That is one major problem that I find that has proved very difficult to implement sustainable development or put it in practice. The second thing is, even though we have these sustainable development goals and we have outcomes, 17 sustainable development goals followed by its outcomes, which number more than 150, I think close to about 160, 170. But in spite of all that, we are yet to attain considerable success as far as securing the sustainable development goals are concerned. And this in part can be explained by the fact that each country has its own vision of what sustainable development goal, how should we implement the sustainable development goal. So that is one major problem that can actually impede the attainment of sustainable development goals, because sustainable development goals is not a magic wand that universities or the national government, it just waves it and presto, everything is set right. What happens is that there are a lot of difficulties in implementing it because we ourselves do not know what should be the pathway to attain the sustainable development goals. So that is one major problem. The second is the lack of resources. Lack of resources and lack of capacity. So in this regard, again, like what I pointed out earlier, there is a lot of dichotomy as far as the first world and of course the third world is concerned. Now, we know that the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities is there in international law. But the basic issue that we are facing is that most First Nations, even though they are the ones who have created most of the problems, most of the global environmental problems, they have not done their bit to actually effectuate a cleanup. So that is basically it's left to the third world countries, low income countries to clean up the environment. So that is also another major challenge that the low income countries are facing as far as implementing sustainable development is concerned. So essentially, to sum up my argument, what I would say is that the first is we do not have specific pathways on how we have to attain the sustainable development goal. It is left to the individual devices of governments, of local governments, of universities. So left to their devices, they're not able to harmoniously bring in their conceptions together and then start out a plan or a pathway to attain sustainable development. That is number one. Number two is the lack of resources. And in this regard, the unwillingness of the developed countries to actually contribute more financial resources, to bring in more financial resources onto the table to resolve the problems that low-income countries are facing. That is also a major challenge. So I think I would put my arguments on these 2 points. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor George. Professor Sonne, your thoughts on the question?
Thank you. My first thought is that I'm probably not the right expert for this. This should go to a development expert. The second thought would be that, of course, the SDGs are very, very broad, and we're talking about the abstract, for the whole world. But there are some goals that I think are being, if not met, but we're certainly moving in the right direction. So in the case of India, for example, we have seen a significant reduction in poverty over the last 2 decades. We're seeing a lot more children in school and passing out of school, and we're seeing a lot less, malnutrition and things related to poor food or lack of food. So I don't think it's fair to generalize and say we're not able to move in the right direction. And I think it also depends on what part of the SDGs that we're looking at. As Professor George said, these are very complex tasks and need a lot of collaboration across, implementation, policy, etc. So I think, yes, so I think that those are my 2 points. These are very, very complicated issues and complex issues. And I think there has been progress in some areas, even though not all areas.
Thank you, Professor Sonne. Professor Afriyani, your thoughts?
Thank you, Professor Arpita. Yes, I agree with Professor Tony and Professor Sonne that this happened because sustainable development is not only an academic problem, but also involves social, environmental, and cultural aspects. Therefore, it requires a multi-sectoral approach and active participation from all parties to achieve the goals of sustainable development. In addition, I think the slow implementation of the necessary policy and action and the lack of awareness and responsibility from the public can also slow down the achievement of the SDG goal holistically in a timely manner. Professor Arpita.
Thank you, Professor Afriyani. My next question is, how can we leverage the broad intellectual capital across institutions to accomplish the UN SDG goals? Are there specific sustainable development goals that universities could and should prioritize? Professor George.
Thank you very much. As far as this question goes, you've got 2 questions. I'll deal with the second one. I don't think I'm competent to answer the first one right now, but of course, in the course of the discussion, many points will emerge, which will actually address the first question. And as far as the second question is concerned, I think that sustainable development goals, the basic problem here is that it's all interconnected and all deserve equal importance. But of course, certain sustainable development goals can be prioritized, but I think that the prioritization should be based on the broader national goals. What are the problems affecting the country? So based on what the national government or the government decides, it would be better for universities to prioritize their sustainable development goals based on the national vision as to which goal should receive priority. For example, I'll tell you that in certain low-income countries, particularly in Africa, the focus can be on Sustainable Development Goal number 16, which talks about institutions. And there we know that there are serious problems as far as for the civil war and other issues. the basic focus on these countries will be on the creation of viable institutions. In certain other countries, the focus may be on gender justice. So basically what I'm trying to say here is that it's better not to actually, if at all we want to involve ourselves in prioritizing the sustainable development goals, we should not break the package, number one. Number two, it would always be better if we prioritize the sustainable development goals in light of what are the national developmental objectives. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor George. Professor Sonne.
I would agree that work with the national priorities that exist where government, whether it's government or sub-government regional focus areas. So in the case of India, they might be a state level priority. Work with those in conjunction with the strengths of your university's focus area. So if you're an agricultural university, then work on agriculture related areas. If it's a business school, then there's a lot of work that can be done around sustainable business practices, sustainable social entrepreneurship, social innovation, etc. So that's what I would say, that we use our own strengths and then work with the priorities set by the government. And perhaps priorities set by other stakeholders, if there are certain. We saw, for example, during COVID-19 was a really interesting example in India. We saw a lot of private sector, civil society, and even universities coming together to try to quickly create new research, or trying to create new resources to help support the country during the COVID-19 crisis. So in similar ways, are there other ways to use our strengths at the university and also work with the priorities either set by government or priorities that are thrown up by crisis or other sort of sense of urgent agendas?
Thank you, Professor Sonne. Professor Afriyani, your thoughts.
Thank you for sharing your thought, Prof. Sonne and Tony. For Universitas Palembang, Indonesia, we think that for capitalizing on the extensive intellectual capital across the institution, the university can strengthen collaboration with faculty and research center and develop cross-disciplinary research initiative. University must integrate sustainability and SDG issue into their curriculum, research, and institutional practice. And this can help, I think, raise student and staff awareness of global issue and individual and institutional impact on sustainability. In addition, I think university can build partnership with industry and the public sector to promote innovation and investment that achieve the SDG goal. In addition, I think there are certain SDG that university can prioritize. For example, university can focus on SDG 4, quality education, by offering innovative curricula that encourage active learning and skill building beyond the classroom. University can also prioritize SDG 7, clean and affordable energy, with a focus on research and development of greener technology and reduce energy consumption on their campuses. SDG 13, for example, action for climate change, and SDG 14, life underwater, can also be prioritized by university in an effort to promote sustainability and environmental preservation. Professor Arpita.
Thank you, Professor Afriyani. I would like to thank the panelists for such thought-provoking comments and discussion on such an important and crucial topic. Now, let us move on to the Q&A session from the audience. We have received some questions and we would follow the same format. The first question is there a need for realigning the vision and mission of a university to include the institutional commitment to SDGs? What are some of the SDGs that your institution is aligned to and initiatives implemented to achieve the same? So it's a two-part question. Professor George.
Okay, I think, yes, definitely there is a need to realign the institutional objectives with the sustainable development goals. It's very important that we realign the vision and mission of the university to cater to the requirements and sustainable developmental goals. Now, as far as my university is concerned, the Jindal Global University, the very motto, that we are a private university that is wedded to public service. So that itself encapsulates our commitment, the commitment of the OP Jindal Global University to sustainable development values. And I can proudly say that we have a sustainable development, a campus that is sustainable development friendly in every sense of the term. And the university has, what I understand, is committed to the entire package of sustainable development goals. And the university and every faculty, every administrative officer, we are all doing our own bit to ensure that it stays this way. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor George. I would like to point out that we have recently participated in the THA Impact Ranking, and we also have a sustainability report at Jindal Global University. Professor Sonne.
Thank you. Given that I'm from the same university, I don't think I need to add to that. But I would say that I think for universities in general, I think it's worth considering how to, again, coming back to the idea of being more practice oriented. Can we realign our research? Can we realign our what we teach in courses to make them more relevant to sustainable development goals, whether it is a greener environment or whether it is, development and poverty alleviation.
Thank you, Professor Sonne. Professor Khodijah, it's a pleasure to have you here with us. Your comments on the question on the vision and mission of your institution regarding sustainable development goals.
Okay, thank you very much. Nice to meet you. Please, I want to answer your questions, the 7 questions about the vision and mission of our university.
Yeah.
Aligning the university's visions and missions with the SDGs is essential to ensure conformity and consistency in institutional commitments to these global goals. Initiatives implemented can range from lecture programs covering SDGs issues, collaborations with relevant organizations and institutions to achieve SDGs, to environmentally responsible use of resources to support SDGs goals. It can also strengthen the university's position in influencing and contributing to global efforts in achieving the SDGs. Some SDGs that can be aligned with educational institutions are quality education, gender equality, sustainable economic growth, innovation, infrastructure and industrializations, responsible consumptions and productions, climate actions, partnerships for purpose. And I think that's all about the 7 questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Khodijah. The next question that we have received from the audience is as follows. The university could provide direction to integrating the social, economic, and environmental goals by adopting the SDGs at the core of its teaching and creating citizens that are sensitive to the issues our world is grappling with. So the question is, what innovations could be done to redefine teaching for integrating SDGs at the core of an institution? Professor George, your thoughts.
Yes, thank you, Professor Arpita. Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I think what the university should basically be doing is, with regard to integrating sustainable development goals at its core activity of teaching, a lot will depend upon redefining and redesigning its curriculum and pedagogy. That is very important. And redesigning its curriculum and pedagogy, by that, what I mean is not just introducing a few add-on topics which may deal with certain aspect of sustainability, but rather to underpin the entire curriculum as well as the pedagogy in the principles of sustainability. Sustainability, even though it's an abstract concept, there's a lot of abstraction behind sustainability. We must also understand that there are certain principles that underpin this concept of sustainability. So when we are trying to develop new courses, when a university is trying to develop new courses on sustainability, giving effect to the idea of sustainability, it is very important that the curriculum as well as the pedagogy has to be anchored in sustainability principles. That is extremely important. And then what I feel is that basically through this redesigning of the curriculum and the pedagogy, rooting it in the ideas of sustainability, the student should be able to understand and reflect upon their actions and decisions as far as the idea of sustainability is concerned. And I feel that secondly, what the university can do is to provide more academic space and freedom. Freedom for especially for those faculty who would want to carry out research in sustainable, in areas that are very integral to the idea of sustainability. So I think these are two important factors that we need to consider when we are talking about redesigning curriculum, or we're talking about integrating the idea of sustainability within the context of a university teaching setting. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor George. That's very thoughtful and insightful. I would like to add the term experimentation to that. So pedagogy and curricular redesign, these need to be supported by the freedom to continually experiment and see what works at what point of time. Thank you, Professor George. Professor Sonne.
I think Professor George really summarized the idea of, very well, the idea of putting SDGs at the core of curricula and curriculum development. I would add again to this idea of collaborating with external stakeholders would be really important to make sure that, again, we get out of our silo and know that whatever we create in terms of curricula aligns with what the society at large needs, aligns with what the government is looking for, etc. Yeah, I think those would probably be my main points. So sort of more practice oriented again, and work with lots of stakeholders outside of the university.
Thank you, Professor Sonne. Professor Khodijah, your thoughts.
Okay, thank you. But the questions, but what innovation could be done to redefine teaching for integrating SDGs at our institution or at the core of our institutions? We have 5 programs to integrating SDGs at our institutions. The first programs the first innovation is SDGs training programs for faculty and staff. Universities can provide specialized training programs for faculty and staff on the concepts, tools, and implementation of SDGs. These trainings helps staff integrated SDGs in every curriculum and university activity. And the second innovation is integrating of SDGs into the curriculum. Universities need to update the curriculum to integrate the SDGs. These updates can be done by adapting more interdisciplinary methods and approach, and providing specific study program on SDGs. The third one is joint projects with the community. Universities can develop joint projects with communities to introduce the concept and goals of SDGs. These projects can be social programs or environmental activities involving university students and staff. And the fourth innovation is interfaculty collaboration. Universities can facilitate cooperation between faculties in implementing projects or programs that supports SDGs. These collaborations can increase participations and creativity in implementing SDGs. And the last innovation is implementation of eco-friendly policies. Universities can implement eco-friendly policies in universities' activities and introduce sustainable living living practice for university students and staff. This will help to build awareness about the importance of environmental conservation in order to achieve the SDGs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Khodijah. We have a lot of questions from the audience, but I think we have time to address just one more question. And the question that I've picked up pertains to a very important challenge or concern to fulfillment of SDGs, and that is the question of greenwashing. So the question is as follows. We see a lot of greenwashing around, with isolated initiatives like installing solar panels or doing wastewater recycling being marketed as proof of a university being green, while continuing with poorly designed energy guzzling buildings, wasting water and electricity, etc. So can you share some examples you have come across of universities that have integrated the SDGs within their internal operations to create truly sustainable campus? Professor George.
Yes, thank you, Professor Arpita. Yeah, as far as this question is concerned, I may be able to throw some light on what is exactly happening in my university, namely the Jindal Global University. And with regards to environment sustainability, what I understand is that we have, the university has put in proper systems in place for the management of solid, hazardous, and electronic waste. So all the three streams of waste are being recycled very effectively. And we have complied with the rules formulated by the government of India in this regard. Then with regard to energy, right now a lot of construction is going on in the campus. But despite that, what I'm given to understand is that we have invested a lot, and we have been able to generate power by using, we have a solar power plant, and we have been able to generate power, which was actually catering to a lot of our domestic requirements. And then the lighting is all LED, so which helps to save and conserve electricity. Then as far as biodiversity aspect is concerned, again, I'm given to understand that nearly half of the university, the total area of the university, it still continues to remain green. And here the focus of the university is on indigenous and native plants. Indigenous plants and native plants, which are indigenous to this locale, the city of Sonipat. Yeah, so there's a lot of focus on trying to conserve and use indigenous species rather than using species brought from other places. That is a positive aspect. And of course, there's a lot of different kinds of birds and animals also inhabit along with the students and faculty in the university. Now, what I understand is that there's a lot of priority given to recycling wastewater. In fact, we use grey water to water the plants. So that is one effective mechanism that we have adopted as far as conservation of water is concerned. In addition to that, I think the university has constructed nearly 50 rainwater harvesting pits. So the basic idea is to ensure that there is a lot of rainwater harvesting, because the place where the university is situated, it's actually considered to be a dark zone as far as groundwater is concerned. So we are sitting in a dark zone. But despite the fact that we are in the dark zone, the university is taking all attempts to ensure that water is managed effectively. Their entire intention is to conserve every drop of water. Then I think we have also involved in community engagement activities, because we have a collaborative approach where students and faculty are involved in activities that occur in the nearby village areas. So this is a global university situated right in the heart of a very conservative and very rural landscape. But despite that fact, we have been able to, reach out to the local communities. And there are several outreach programs have been initiated as regards hygiene, as regards legal awareness, the idea of literacy, gender justice. So we are also involved, and we also provide a lot of employment opportunities to the local community. So these are some of the broad ways in which the university is actually facilitating the idea of sustainable development. In addition to that, of course, teaching and pedagogy, which I have already mentioned, we have a lot of courses. We have a center on environment and sustainability, and then we have a school on environment and sustainability. We have a center for environmental laws and climate change, and then we have another center on sustainability itself. And we have a lot of courses that have been developed to further the idea of sustainability. For example, we have courses on water law, sustainable oceans law and policy. We have a course in natural resources management law, and these courses are cross-listed. So students from other disciplines are also able to enroll and study these courses. So in this manner, we have actually facilitated the idea of sustainable development. We have implemented the idea of sustainable development. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Professor George. I would like to briefly add to it. We have been receiving a lot of collaborative interinstitutional funding in the area of sustainability, where we are working with universities around the globe. Professor Sonne, would you like to add something to the list provided by Professor George?
I wouldn't actually. I think it was a very, very solid list. So yeah, I'll move on to the next. Let you move on to the next speaker.
All right. Thank you, Professor Sonne. Professor Khodijah, your thoughts?
Thank you, Professor Arpita Gupta. There are 7 examples of universities that have integrated sustainable development goals in their international operations to create a truly sustainable campus. The following are some examples. First, Arizona State University. I'm proud to announce you all that Raden Fatah has signed MOU with Arizona State University to enhance international partnerships. The university has set a goal to become a sustainable university because of 4 key area: energy and resource governance, food and water resources, science and continuing education, and sustainable society and culture. And the second university is Yale University. Yale University has a climate change and environment initiative that aims to promote responsible action toward the natural environment and encourage teaching, research, and training in this regard. And the third university is University of California, Los Angeles. University of California has climate change and sustainable programs that focuses on environmental improvement programs, environmental education, and sustainable policy settings. The fourth university is University of British Columbia. University of Columbia has an ongoing action plan that encourages greenhouse gas emission reductions, energy and water saving, promotes sustainable mobility, and fosters a green campus environment. The fifth university is Aalto University. Aalto University in Helsinki, Finland, has adopted sustainable learning environments through project-based learning methods, the use of renewable energy, and reducing the university's overall carbon emissions. The sixth university is University of Eindhoven in Netherlands. This university has adopted a program called Campus Environments that includes carbon emission reductions, efficient use of resources, sustainable food choice, and energy saving. And the last university is University of Sydney, Australia. This university has a sustainable initiative consisting of environmental improvement programs, sustainable governance, and environmental teaching, and that encourage students to be environmentally responsible. There are many other examples around the world, and hopefully this can be an inspiration for other universities to follow in their footsteps and make change for the better for the environment, and the earth will live. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Khodijah. We have also reached the end time for the session. I hope that we are able to continue this discussion in future sometime. I would like to thank all the panelists for such a productive session today. Professor Khodijah, Professor Afriani, Professor George, Professor Sonne. Thank you for such a productive session. Thank you.